Hello and welcome to Academic English. Today we will focus on CELBAN Writing Task B, which is the letter writing task in your response or in your exam. We will start by looking at understanding the question, the organization of the response. We will write a response step by step together, and then finally we will look at some tips and strategies that will help you be successful when completing this task. Let's begin by looking at some general overview of this response. In this task, you will be given a text, very short text, a few sentences, and based on that text, you will need to write a letter expressing your opinion, whether you agree or disagree. You have about 20 to 25 minutes to write your response. Start with task B because it has more points than task A, and do spend 20 to 25 minutes because, again, it has more points. And you have about a page and a half to write on. There's no word limit, but they want you to have the organization, the content, and so on. So do try to use all that space. And if your handwriting is too big, make sure to change that so you can fit everything in because CELBAN doesn't give you extra paper. So this is what it looks like. This is from the CELBAN Center handouts. You can find them on the CELBAN Center website. I think they are $75 each handout for each skill. But we will look at this in more detail when we analyze the question step by step. But as you can see, you have the text, you have the instructions, and this is the space you have allocated to write, a page and a half. So when you try to understand what the question is, try to look at the last sentence in the text or in the prompt that you've been given. This is very important because the sentences before that are basically just general information, but your response should focus on this last sentence. So let's look at this particular question that we're going to work with today. It says, advanced robotic systems give doctors greater control and vision during surgery, allowing them to perform safe, less invasive, and precise surgical procedures. During robotic-assisted surgery, surgeons operate from a console equipped with robotic arms. Computer software takes the place of actual hand movements and can make movements very precise. The benefits of minimally invasive robotic surgery can include smaller incisions, less pain, lower risk of infection, shorter hospital stays, quicker recovery time, less scarring, and reduced blood loss. As you can see, all of this is general information. Now let's see what the question is really asking us to write. With so many benefits, hospitals should spend more money on developing this technology and equipping themselves with robotic systems. So because this is really a statement, is not a question, let's try to make this into a yes or no question. Look at the auxiliary verb from the question, from the statement, and we're going to start our yes and no question with that. So we will say, should hospitals spend more money equipping themselves with robotic systems? So as you can see, that is the focus of our response. So then you will talk about agree or yes. If you say yes, they should spend more money, and then give reasons why. And for the disagree, no, they shouldn't spend more money on robotic systems. And then give reasons why not. So you're not focusing on as much on the benefits versus drawbacks of robotic systems, which most of the students will probably write about that, benefits versus drawbacks. The question is really asking you, should they spend the money? Should hospitals spend more money on robotic systems? So yes, why should they spend more money on robotic systems? And if you look at these sentences before, they actually give you a lot of details that you could use in your response as well, or main points. So keep an eye on that. It's not just blabber, right? It's useful information that you can use in your letter. So why should they spend more money on robotic systems? Less scarring, shorter hospital stay, less pain, smaller incisions, lower risk of infection, reduced blood loss, right? So many ideas already in this prompt. And then say, why shouldn't they spend more money on equipping themselves? So if you are going to the brainstorming part of your response, on the one side, you will say, agree, why spend more money? And for the disagree, you say, why not spend more money on robotics? And try to think of synonyms for spend money, robotics, because you're going to use this over and over and over again through your response. So we're going to think of that together as well. So now that we understood what the question is asking us, it's important to look at the organization of the response before we proceed to writing about the response. So the very first component in your letter should be the greeting. And you can find that, we're going to look at them step by step, but you can find that in the instructions. And then you will need to have an introduction, and then the main body, which is where you're going to talk about your agree and disagree statements or arguments. Then you need an ending and a final greeting, which is usually your name. So looking at the beginning greeting of your response, in the instruction, it tells you who you are writing the letter for. It's usually the editor of the hospital newsletter, but look at the instructions because they tell you. So in this case, it says, you read the statement above in an article in your local hospital newsletter. Write a letter to the editor of your local hospital newsletter, agreeing or disagreeing with the statement above. Clearly express your opinion and provide a rationale for your ideas. So in this case, we're writing a letter to the editor. So you could say, dear editor, comma. You could capitalize editor because it's a job title. You don't need to. You can also write in lowercase. If they give you Mr. or Mrs., which I haven't heard of so far from the students' feedback of them giving you Mr. Smith or Mrs. Smith as a name, a specific name to write to. But if they do, then you would say, dear Mr. and family name, and then comma. This comma is very important because you are being marked on punctuation as well. So make sure you have the comma there. Okay. So now that we know who are we writing for in this task, we can go ahead and put that down. Dear editor, comma, and then you're going to leave that page blank. Don't write anything else there. And you will continue on the next page, beginning with your introduction. But that is all you write up here for the greeting. So after you have the greeting at the beginning of your letter, you need to write an introduction. In the introduction, there's two components. First, you need to introduce yourself and then state your opinion on the topic. So in the first component, you will say, hi. Sorry, you already said dear editor, so you don't need a greeting. And then you will say, my name is Susan Smith. Or I am a nurse in this hospital and an avid reader of the hospital newsletter. And that is our first component, which is basically introducing yourself. And now in the next sentence, this sentence is very important. Here is where you will repeat or restate the question, and you will also include your opinion. So you can say, I am writing this letter in regards to your recent article stating that hospitals should invest more resources into developing and purchasing robotic systems. It's a good idea to think of synonyms as much as you can. So instead of put more money or spend more money, we said invest. Instead of buying or equipping themselves, we said purchasing. Okay, so try to use synonyms because it's a good way to boost your vocabulary score, because vocabulary is one of the criteria you're being marked on. And now we need to add our opinion. So to say with which I completely agree or completely disagree or somewhat agree, somehow disagree. I would say I somewhat agree. So with which I somewhat agree. And this is our opinion part of the introduction. So basically, as you can see, you introduce yourself, say why you're writing the letter, and also if you agree or disagree. And remember, they want you to include both sides of the argument. And since you're going to discuss both sides of the argument, try to stay somewhere in the middle. So I somewhat agree, I agree up to a point, or I somewhat disagree, I disagree up to a point. Okay, because you're talking about both. I would stay away from saying I completely agree or I completely disagree, because then that means your essay will only focus on agree, only focus on disagree. Pay attention to that. So talking about the body of your response, it's important to discuss both sides of the argument, even if you strongly agree with the topic or you cannot think of reasons for disagree. Try really hard to think of both sides, because you are being marked. It's one of the marking criteria in terms of content. Okay? And also start with the point that you feel the strongest about. So if you agree, in the first paragraph of your body, write about agree, and vice versa. Also, it's important to use paragraph structure. So have one paragraph for agree, one paragraph for disagree. And you need about 2 main points for agree, 2 main points for disagree. And for each main point, you need a detail or an example. I know it's a lot, but we're going to do this together and you will understand what I mean by everything. So for the paragraph structure, it's a good idea to structure it this way. Of course, there are other ways to structure your paragraph, but I would strongly encourage you to use this structure. So let's say for the agree paragraph, you will have first supporting reason why you agree, a developing sentence, which is a detail or an example, and then another developing sentence, still talking about this first point. And then you will have a second reason why you agree. And then you will have again detail or example. It's important to include about 1 example per paragraph because examples are very important when being marked on this part of CELBAN writing. And for paragraph 2, you could have the same structure, supporting sentence 1, developing sentence 1, developing sentence 2, supporting sentence 2, developing sentence 1, developing sentence 2. Or you could structure it this way. You could have just one developing sentence for each supporting sentence. Remember, this is the opinion that you don't really agree with. So you don't need to focus as much time and as much energy developing your reasons why, right? You're just providing this other side of the argument. But again, ideally try to have the same structure for both paragraphs. So now let's see how we can do that. Let's go back to our brainstorming. So in the sample answer we're writing together, we said that we somewhat agree, which means we disagree more than agree. So that being said, we're going to start our first paragraph with disagree. And our second paragraph, we will talk about the agree. So for disagree, supporting sentence 1, or our main reason why we disagree, we could say something like, hospitals shouldn't spend more money on robotics. They should spend money on hiring more staff. And then for your developing sentence, for your developing sentence 1, you could say, think about why, when, where, how, what. In this case, you could answer the question, what? What do we mean by more staff? You could say doctors, nurses, aides. And for your developing sentence 2, you could focus on why, because there is a real shortage in the hospital of these professionals. Okay? And when you brainstorm, just quickly in keywords, so that when you write the letter, it's going to be easier to just refer to the keyword, and for each of these points, you're going to make a sentence. And then supporting sentence 2, you could say they should spend more money on increasing capacity or more beds. And then for your developing sentence 1, you could say it allows for more patients to be treated. And also say that it reduces complications due to early discharge. Okay, so these are our main points. And the sentences that follow basically give more information on the main points. So what do you mean by hiring more people? What do you mean by increased capacity? Okay, so now we have the outline for the first paragraph. Let's think about the outline for the other side of the argument. Agree. Why spend more money on robotics? And again, the sentence, the question itself gives you a lot of ideas why. You could just pick from there. So for supporting sentence 1, we could say reduces human error. Developing sentence 1 could be something like we're focusing on surgery, so you could describe a little bit more what do you mean by reduces human error. So we can say doing surgical procedures. For developing sentence 2, you could develop a little bit more and say the precision, precise, incision. You could also talk about the sutures after. There we go. And then for another point, you could talk about, I know the question focuses on robotics, especially for surgical procedure. Yeah, during surgery. So yeah, maybe let's keep it to that and let's focus on surgeries specifically, not diagnosis. So if we focus on surgery, let's take one of the ideas they gave us here. Let's say quicker recovery time as one of our main points for agree. Here we go. And for developing sentence 1, you could say, you could explain why it's quicker recovery time because it's less invasive. And for developing sentence 2, give an example. Give any example really. In this case, let's just say laser surgery for removing kidney stones. So then our main points for agree for the second paragraph would be reduces human errors and quicker recovery time. Okay, so now let's go back to our body, the body of our paragraph, our essay. We are going to write about disagree first. It's very important to use transition words. Okay, there we go. So let's start with a transition word. On one hand, I completely I disagree that well-care facilities should invest in surgical technology, let's say in their state-of-the-art. There you go. So we try to use synonyms for hospitals, and we try to use synonyms for buy or spend money and robotic systems. Try to use synonyms as many times as you can throughout your response. So this is the first sentence in our first paragraph. And again, we're focusing on disagree. So now let's start with that SS1. Okay. We're going to talk about they should be spending money on hiring more staff. And let's say we can even include it here a little bit because there are greater or more pressing needs that hospitals should tackle first. And then you can say to begin with, this is your SS1. So for SS1, we said spend money on hiring more staff. Begin with hospitals. Should focus on hiring, such as nurses, doctors, and care aides. And I already included a developing sentence in there. And then we're going to talk about BS2, which was talking about the shortage. Nowadays, sorry, let's maybe make that a little bit less general. You can say this is because there is a shortage of healthcare workers affecting all hospitals. So again, it doesn't have to be very complex, but if you want to make it more complex, you can definitely do that. So as you can see, we have our first main point, or SS1, with the transition word. We included a developing sentence here already, and this is our second developing sentence. And all of it is focused on the main point, which is hiring more staff. And now because we're adding something, you could say, moreover. This is our SS2, or supporting sentence 2. Another urgent need in care facilities, the lack of beds. So hospitals should increase their, or should spend their resources on increasing their capacity. So that's our main point. And then we're going to add developing sentence 1. This will allow for more patients to be treated. It will also reduce, this is our developing sentence 2, the risk of complications that arise from early discharge due to limited bed numbers. Okay, so then we have developing sentence 1 and developing sentence 2. And again, we have a transition word when we moved on to the main point. And a transition word at the beginning of our paragraph. So as you can see, we wrote one sentence for each component of the paragraph. So we have a topic sentence. We have a sentence for the main point. Sometimes these two, you can group them together. Sometimes you can group these two together. But we have each component. As long as you have each component, it's roughly about one sentence for each component. And then let's go to the disagree, or sorry, to the other side of the argument, which is the agree part. We're going to end our response here for paragraph 1. And then we're going to go on to the second paragraph, You can indent if you want to. You don't need to for letter writing, but if you want to, you could do it. I know some students prefer to indent. You don't need to. So then you could say, on the other hand, and now we're going to focus on the agree, and we're going to make this into our first sentence of the paragraph. I acknowledge that there is a need as well for investing or for purchasing, developing and purchasing robotic system in healthcare facilities. So that is our first sentence. And then we're going to move on to our first supporting point, SS1. First, use a transition word. We could say use surgical robots could, what do we say? Reduce human error. Okay. Could reduce the risk and the amount of human errors during surgeries. Maybe because we use surgical, let's say operations instead of surgeries. Okay, and we talked about the precision of the incision, the sutures being very exact. So let's explain, what do we mean by reduce the amount of human errors? You could say, in other words, robots or using robotics during surgical procedures leads to precise incisions and we can say in here, especially during delicate surgeries. Such as open heart surgery. And we have a lot of surgeries here. You could think of more synonyms. Okay, and then is there anything else we need to cover for this point? Okay, so let's talk about the sutures. Also, the sutures will be exact and precise as well. Okay, let's talk about the second supporting point. Okay, another reason why robotic systems should be a priority is because they lead to, or their use leads to faster recovery time. Transition word, and then your SS2, quicker recovery times. You could say, this is especially true in the case of less invasive surgeries. To exemplify, examples have to be very specific, so make sure you give an actual example. But to exemplify, a patient who needs a surgery to remove bladder stones or kidney stones. Need surgery for kidney stones? Depending how big they are. No, I'm not sure. Okay, so to exemplify, it doesn't matter. You're not judged on your medical knowledge, so you can give any example. You're judged on your English, so we're going to go with it. To exemplify, a patient who needs a surgery to remove kidney stones would be given the choice to elect a laser surgery instead of the traditional method. I hope that makes sense. Let's read that sentence a little bit. To exemplify, a patient who needs a surgery to remove kidney stones could be given the choice to elect laser surgery instead of the traditional methods, as being able to be discharged sooner. So that's our example. Very important to have at least one example in the body of your answer. So now let's focus on the ending. In the ending, you could say, conclude, and just repeat your opinion. Even though, I say surgical robots are important, even though surgical robots are important, hospitals need to address more urgent needs before venturing into investing in this technology. So you're just repeating your opinion or repeating this sentence in the introduction. Okay. You're just restating it using different words. And then also in the conclusion or in the ending, make sure to thank your audience. Thank you for taking the time to read my letter. And that's your conclusion. If you indented, make sure you have a transition word. If you indented paragraphs, make sure to do that for the introduction and the conclusion as well. And now the final greeting. It's the easiest part of your response. You can say best regards, best wishes, warm regards, and then underneath you will say your name. And that is your response. So let me show you how it looks. Let's eliminate these so you can see it. Okay, and then so if you're writing your response, this is what it will look like. You will have an introduction with the components. You will have the first paragraph, if you agree or disagree. Second paragraph, which is the counter argument, conclusion, and final greetings, which is best regards or warm wishes, and so on. Before we end our video, let's look at some strategies to keep in mind when you write these tasks. First, remember to stay on topic. Make sure that you fully understand the question. You're not writing something that you're not being asked to write. Like I said, for this question, many students will be tempted to write about benefits and drawbacks of robotic surgery, but that's not what the question is asking for. So remember, make it into a yes or no question and then fully understand what the question is asking for. Another strategy is to have good organization. Remember, greeting, introduction. Introduction has two components, paragraph for agree or disagree, and the paragraph from the counter argument. Remember, the paragraph has a topic sentence, supporting sentences with developing sentences. And then you have the conclusion and the end greeting. Another tip and strategy is to develop your answer. So make sure you have arguments, reasons, and then you also give details and examples. Don't just say because of this, but develop more. Discuss both sides of the argument, both agree and disagree. We mentioned that before. Use a variety of grammatical structures. Use a combination of simple sentences and complex sentences in order to boost your grammar score. Grammar for this task is marked ×2, so it's very important. Use transition words, as you saw, the transition words we used in our answer whenever you are introducing a new supporting sentence, or whenever you start a paragraph, whenever you introduce a new main point, whenever you give an example, always have a transition before that. And be cohesive. Organization will help you with that, because if you're organizing your response the way we learned today, cohesiveness is going to be there. And the last tip and strategy is to proofread your letter. Allow yourself a couple of minutes at the end of your test to read over, make sure that you have the organization and so on, but also make sure that you check your sentence structure, look at the verb tenses, look at articles, look at the vocabulary, make sure you're not too repetitive. As you can see, surgical, 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 it comes up quite a bit. So make sure to use synonyms and replace vocabulary whenever possible during this proofreading. Check your spelling, make sure you have capitalization, and use the proper punctuation for your letter. And that is it. I know it's been a bit of a longer lesson just because there's a lot of components to learn, but let me know what you think in the comments, and I'll see you also this week, I think later this week, with another speaking video. Looking forward to your feedback.